Gennet wiped the sweat from his eyes, but they immediately began stinging again as more moisture dripped out of his matted hair. He sighed and took another squishy, sloshy step forward. Ahead of him, his companions also moved carefully, lurching as the distastefully spongy floor gave slightly with each step. Around them, bubbles of boiling water coursed up the sides of the strange, skin-like tunnel they walked through. Elderly looked back at him over her shoulder. "Feels like we're walking through something's intestines." Gennet wrinkled his nose. "Smells a bit like it, too." Elderly laughed out loud. "I know, this place is so wrong," Gennet said. "Well, I suppose, but almost whimsical." "In a what's-gonna-kill-me kind of way, yes, I suppose." Elderly laughed again and continued to make her way through the strange, membranous tunnel. "But think about it, the grumpy sphinx, the room with those strange glass spheres, that strange metal thing that pushed one way but not the other. What was it called?" "Turnstile?" "Yes! Never seen such a thing before. I wonder what's going to come next." As she spoke, from up ahead a strange clacking sound commenced. Gennet sighed and unsheathed his sword. "We're about to find out." Elderly halted and looked at the thin membrane holding back the lake of boiling water. Careful where you swing that thing." Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I am Dan Ream. I don't know where Tom is. I heard some screams last night, heard goblins dragging something away and pummeling it, and some whimpers, but I wasn't getting out of bed to see what was going on. So I don't know. He just wasn't here today. So you're stuck with me. I'm not nearly as capable as he, but we're going to get through this as we would a dungeon, which does happen to be the topic of today's episode. If it's your first time, welcome. We'll hope that you find something useful or at least mildly entertaining today. For those of you returning, you know that we have chosen topics to go through monthly, and we've gone back to the roots. So once a month we look at dragons, and once a month we look at dungeons. So this particular week we are looking at a classic from the Tales from the Yawning Portal, Plume Mountain. Now, if you are like me and you have built your gaming experience on homebrew, then this was not particularly well known to me. But again, I kind of feel like I come late to the party on a lot of different things. I think I just have a contrary disposition or whatever. But looking through this dungeon was a lot of fun. And I realized I've been shortchanging myself. Even if I'm going to do homebrew, I really should be reading some of these materials just for ideas. I mean, I'm a little, I'm a little embarrassed and feel a little sorry for the people that I have led campaigns for over the years that I haven't made better use of this resource. So, better late than never, I guess. So we're going to dive in. We're going to talk just a little bit about Plume Mountain and just give you sort of an overview. So there will be some spoilers. So if you are a player and you think you might be experiencing this soon, then I was going to say don't listen, but it's always nice to have the views and the listens racked up. So just mute it and let it run. For everybody else, give you sort of an overview of it. Maybe it'll spark your interest to go back and have another look at this particular dungeon. So one of the nice things about it is very standalone. It does have some lore with it, but it's lore that you can reposition in any of the main D&D worlds or easily in one of your own homebrew world as well. So Plume Mountain is essentially a volcano, 800 feet tall. I think they said like 1,000 yards wide or something like that in diameter. It is a steam volcano. So it functions as a geyser at the top, essentially. There's a routine of steam being blown out of the top, which obviously gives it the name Plume Mountain. Now, the story is that an ancient wizard, Caraptus, was on the run and found this place to make his lair. And that's really the main background setup for why this dungeon is the way it is. If you were going to send players in, then the hook that the book suggests is that the wizard has stolen 3 legendary weapons, and you are supposed to go in and recover them. So pretty simple as far as instructions go. The 3 are Wave, Whelm, and Black Razor. And it's not that difficult in the sense that players are given a note with a poem on it that says very clearly, they're in the mountain. Now, information for DMs, this is for 8th level players. This is a dungeon that splits its emphasis pretty equally between action and combat and problem solving. So they do make note of the fact that if you have players that really just like a plain old dungeon crawl, enter room, kill monster, get stuff, repeat, this might not be to their taste. There are lots of mysteries to solve and lots of just general problem solving as you work your way through. The dungeon itself is not terribly complex, which again I think makes really nice for perhaps a newer DM in some ways, because there's one entrance, you get in, and there's immediately 3 different paths to choose from. So 3 paths, 3 artifacts to claim. It's pretty clear to the players what they need to do to defeat the dungeon, to succeed. However, there are some things that do make this trickier. It's going to force characters, I think, that have relied on one suite of spells and abilities, they're going to have to switch and find something else, because the notes say that all floors of the dungeon are covered by 1 foot of water. So that's going to be slippery. So, dex saves and checks are probably going to be required with some regularity. Speed is going to be reduced as you slosh through. Invisibility is going to be compromised. You can certainly cast invisibility on yourself, but everybody's going to see the splashing wherever you go. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It could be frustrating, but for a player, but as a DM, I could see how this would be really tempting if you've had players that have perhaps overused something like invisibility, and this is a chance to force them into some other choices. So if nothing else, I like the idea of that. I do have players that rely on things that I think, okay, let's see if you can broaden your scope a little bit. So this gives me some ideas about how to do that on my own with the homebrew. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other puzzles and problems and challenges that players will face as they go into this dungeon. And then after that, we'll move on to looking at the creatures just briefly. So the challenges and the puzzles, I think, really are the ones that they caught my eye the most. They're wildly creative, bizarre, but a lot of fun. Something I think that the right group of players would just really enjoy. There's one room that's got glass globes suspended above, and it's sort of like some sort of a demented like piñata game. You're supposed to break them. Some of them have good things, some of them have bad things. But of course, as a player, you're not going to be satisfied until you've broken them all and had to deal with all the rather nasty things that come flying out of there, including some treasure, though. There's another room where you must cross over 2 geysers that are firing off on a regular schedule. But the way to do that is to climb onto these wooden discs that are suspended by chains far above. So you're essentially getting onto a series of wobbly pendulums, and you have to be able to leap from one to the other and time it so that you don't get scalded with the boiling water. So if you have a particularly large group, then that does become a bit more of a challenge, because you all have to obviously cross over sort of one at a time. But if you're in any kind of a time crunch, then you're going to have to move pretty quick, which means that you're gonna have to take more risks with the geysers. There are some other interesting things. I did mention in the opening the turnstile. There actually is a turnstile just installed in one of the hallways that you can go through one way but not the other. So the book does say eventually the players may decide to just destroy it. So there's methods to do that as well. The other thing I thought was really kind of intriguing is there's a underwater tunnel through a boiling lake, but the tunnel walls are composed of like a membrane, and the book goes into great detail to say it does not regenerate. So if you poke a hole in it, you're just going to get squirted with boiling water, which causes a little bit of damage. But if you damage it too severely, then it will collapse in a certain number of rounds and basically boil everybody to death. So, of course, when you get to the end of this tunnel, you have to fight a giant crab. Now, the book says the crab understands not to do anything to the walls itself, but if you try to cast a fireball on it, if you try to use lightning, if you're just swinging wildly with a large weapon, you're going to probably doom the entire party. So that's another way where it sort of forces players to use something other than their go-to attack mechanisms, I think. There's an electrified metal hall, and I thought this was creative. If you are a wizard or a sorcerer walking through there with just your robes on, you won't even notice it. But if you have metal armor on, the electric current heats you up like a gigantic heat metal spell, and it's nasty. I don't think a person can run through in time to save their lives. So it's going to force the paladin and the fighter perhaps to doff and don the metal armor. There is also a frictionless room, and at one end a razor pit full of rusty, sharp objects that, no lie, will possibly cause you to contract super-tetanus if you fall into it. So, like I said, there's sort of a mix of this is really tough and kind of nasty, and also I don't think we're meant to take it too hyper seriously, which I suppose is what a lot of game tables are like. A lot of chances for sort of joking and messing around a little bit, and the authors of this particular dungeon really played into that, as I said, with the super-tetanus. There are also some puzzles and riddles that the party will be confronted with, and if they solve them correctly, can obviously do some good things for them. There is a number puzzle that they need to solve, and if they do that correctly, they can actually get an ally to help them throughout much of the maze. That's kind of nice. And they actually have to solve a riddle to even get entrance into the dungeon to begin with, or at least safe entrance. And that does lead me to talking a little bit about the denizens, the inhabitants of this particular dungeon. So, as you could probably guess, the first creature that the party meets is a sphinx. So the sphinx is, I ask them a riddle. If they answer it correctly, lets them through. If not, attacks them, just as all good sphinxes should do. But I was reading a little bit, just some commentary from people who've played this, and one idea I thought was pretty clever and could be pretty fun is this DM who had run that said, well, this is a sphinx, so it's a cat-like creature being forced to crouch in a foot of water. That can't be pleasant for anybody, let alone a feline. So he made the sphinx very grumpy and very much antagonistic toward the wizard that put her in this predicament. So this particular DM had her tell the party, just answer this riddle quick and get in there and kill this guy, because I'm really sick of sitting here. So that's the first creature that you meet. There are some others. There's a giant crab. There are some ghouls. There's some golems. It's themed pretty appropriately to the to the dungeon itself, which is, well, you'd expect that, but it's nice that they've done that successfully. There's also a whole bunch of humanoids, I guess I should say a whole bunch, but a number of humanoids who appear to be former treasure seekers who were snared in this dungeon by the wizard himself, and they are forced to now defend it. So that could make for some interesting role play as well as combat, I think, if as a DM you really lean into that. I think the other thing to talk about is, once you do get all three of the weapons, you can try to make your way back out, but you will be confronted by one final boss fight, I suppose, where the wizard's last strongest minions are gonna try to get you. One thing that's interesting though is that you actually do not meet the wizard himself. I think that's an interesting choice. I like the fact that it's, I don't know if you want to say a misdirect, but it is something unexpected in this dungeon full of unexpected things. But as I was reading a little bit about this, that is something that might disappoint players if they want to, if they go in expecting a very epic battle against what could be a lich, then that might be something you need to homebrew as a DM and give to them, because otherwise the only time the wizard makes an appearance is as a disembodied voice sort of taunting the players. So I also went out and tried to look for some reviews. What do people out there in the ether think of this particular dungeon? And it does get pretty good reviews. Commenter after commenter noted just it's a fun, it's a challenge, but it's not deadly serious like the Tomb of Horrors. It's meant to be a little tongue-in-cheek, meant to play into the kind of table that likes to make a few silly jokes, bring in a few modern ideas and cliches and things like that. And this just makes that easier to do. So all in all, this does seem like a worthy addition to the knowledge base of any DM. It's quite portable as dungeons go. You can insert it as a side quest if your players are maybe have gone through a slog of outdoor, sort of wilderness adventure or lots of social role play, political intrigue. This is, something a little different, a little lighter to break the mood a little bit. So I definitely think this is worth considering. One last thing I did forget to mention about this dungeon that is kind of cool is it does have a terraced aquarium that you kind of have to work your way through, filled with all sorts of nasty things that will try to eat you, as any self-respecting aquarium in a dungeon would have. So I'm looking at the timestamps here, and I am realizing that what I have done is I have paired a relatively straightforward dungeon with not a huge amount of things to talk about with a solo podcast by me, and I also tend to run out of things to say, unfortunately. So those of you with a commute that's longer than 30 minutes, I apologize. I guess you could roll it back and listen to it again, but that's White Plume Mountain. I think it is as I said, just to repeat, it is a fun dungeon. It's light in tone in places, but quite dangerous in others. And it does require players to improvise and come up with new solutions to problems without using the tried and true weapons and spells that they've probably come to rely on a little too much in other adventures. So in that sense, I think it is a really, really smartly written, well thought out dungeon, and would be good to add to your repertoire. So now's the part where I get to tell you, please connect with us. We love hearing from you. You can follow us on Instagram or Facebook, Teachers in the Dungeon. You can see us on X on @DungeonTeachers, and you can just email directly teachersinthedungeon@gmail.com. So be curious to know, if you've played White Plume Mountain, what did you think of it? Were there any things that you changed? Any favorite parts, any parts that didn't work? Any of that sort of thing. I am curious to see how this runs, because I do think I'm going to be surgically removing parts of these and inserting them into some homebrew dungeons that I've got sort of cooking on the back burner. So, I mixed some metaphors there. Need to rethink that. All right, anyway, this is Dan. I think I probably should haul myself up and see if I can find what happened to Tom and hopefully drag him back so that you can have both of us discussing our topics next week. Talk to you later, folks.